Once again, something that is entirely too big to fit in frame. So if you want to see the entire thing, you're gonna have to wait for some glamour shots later on that'll splice in as B-roll footage, but the L96 or AWP kit from Worker is one of the coolest things they've ever done. I really like this kit, and it kind of baffles me that they haven't gone full deep into making this an injection molded kit yet, because I feel like that would be way faster and would actually sell if they could get the price quite a bit down, but unfortunately I haven't really seen anything Worker has done since the Terminator. I know they did like the transparent shells for the Hurricane and stuff like that, but after that I haven't seen anything else from them, and it's been really quiet these last few months. I'm kind of worried, but the L96 kit is golden. The problem, it's way too expensive, but if you really want a good bolt action blaster and you have the strength to prime this thing with the 25 coil spring and everything you can get with the Retaliator or the Prophecy, I highly recommend it. But of course, the whole kit comes in not colors that match the Prophecies at all. So I finally did rebuild this thing. When I took it to Ragnarok Oktoberfest 2018, it slammed against a wall and it broke the front of the Prophecy, and thus I had not been using the blaster. Which is a shame, because I loved this blaster a lot. I took it with me pretty much every war I went to because it's just so darn fun. It's a bolt-action, high-performance rifle in NERF. That's not something you usually get. In fact, this is one of the best. I think the only way you could get something remotely comparable to this is either like HPA or some kind of crazy flywheel setup, which would kind of ruin the bolt-action aesthetic. That's one of the reasons why I like this so much, even though, again, you're priming back a monstrous spring inside this Prophecy with that metal bolt, which we will talk about, but the colors didn't match, and since I finally got a new Prophecy, special thanks to Andrew for sending me one, I decided not only to rebuild this entire blaster from the ground up, upgrade it as much as possible with some aftermarket parts, which I'll talk about, but I also wanted to paint it so it would kind of match, and thus meet L-Chan. If you've ever seen or read Sword Art Online Alternative, the Gun Gale Online thing that follows Len, well, yep. Instead of P-Chan, I did L-Chan. And the reasoning for that is A, I love the color pink, and B, I mean, I could have painted the entire thing pink like hers with some very, very subtle black accents, but I think this looks a little bit better in my opinion. It still kind of looks like a rifle, but at the same time, it's bright pink, which if you didn't know, pink is my favorite color, and I am well aware of the fact that since I painted this pink, not only are people going to have a problem with that and say I ruined the blaster, but it's also going to get less views because it's pink, and you know what? Pink blasters deserve some love, so make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you like this kind of thing, because this took a long time. I'm gonna mainly go over the paint job right now, and then we'll get to the internals a little bit later, but this is the first blaster I've done from the ground up, completely with an airbrush. This is my airbrush that I've had for a very long time. I got this on a deep discount from Amazon. It is a Badger Renegade Velocity. Oh, it's not even in there. Here it is. This is an airbrush. Think of it like a mini spray gun. That's exactly what it is. It atomizes paint with a compressor and lets you basically get things smooth like if you were using rattle cans, but the difference with like an airbrush like this one is, one, it's gravity fed, so I don't have to worry about things kind of stopping. I can kind of point it whatever direction it's always going to feed, unless I try to do it upside down. And if I just pull back the trigger a little bit, only a little bit of paint comes out. If I pull the trigger back a lot of paint comes out. And of course, you get to mix together your own paints and everything, because it will spray pretty much anything out of the cup here. It's not a very big cup, as you probably noticed, but the cool thing about airbrushes is you get a lot of mileage out of a little bit of paint. Way better than, like, this would have taken me probably a can or two of spray paint to get done, but since I have way finer control over everything, this little airbrush, I got through about one little bottle of paint. So this is the size of some of the paint things I used. I used about half of one of these of pink and got almost the entire blaster done. And it's just a tiny little bottle, you mix it. I actually use little test tubes here to mix this stuff together with some thinner, and then I just store this, and when I need it, I can shake it up, I can blend it together a little bit more, put a little bit more in there, and paint the entire blaster. But I do mean the entire blaster. Even the primer was done with the airbrush, and yes, even the clear coat was done with an airbrush. This is all stuff, if you followed any kind of model making tutorials using an airbrush online, you've probably seen before. And to be perfectly honest, it works pretty dang well, actually. I'm really pleased with how well this thing works. Obviously, this is complete overkill. You would not want to paint something like this with a little brush like this. I did it anyway, and it took a long time. It took several hours, but it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I got a lot better, I felt, at controlling this thing and mastering how much paint I need to use where, and I'm only gonna get better from here on out, or so I hope. A nice little investment. You do need a compressor to go with this. I have a cheap Harbor Freight one that works perfectly fine. And if you do a lot of paint jobs, it might be worth getting into some kind of airbrush. Even like the Harbor Freight airbrush would be a very cheap and effective option if you're looking to get into airbrushing. So I really like that one. It works really well. I have had no problems with it. I did need to learn exactly how much pressure I needed to use and so forth. I needed to kind of work on thinning things out. Basically, if you have a paint, just get the thinner that is for that paint. They sell it individually anyway. And you can also buy pre-mixed, pre-thinned everything that works perfectly fine out of the box if you want to spend a bit more money. So, and there's a lot of paint things that you could do that you can't do with, you know, rattle cans as effectively that you can do with an airbrush. I haven't demonstrated any of that here, but in the future I will get better and I will do some pretty crazy cool stuff with it once I have more paints and more money. But I wanted an L96 kit that performed well and looked like its own thing. And it's not perfect. In fact, you can already tell, especially on this side, it's already scuffed up a bit, but I did the absolute best I could. And honestly, this paint job is really nice and durable in most places. It's just, yeah, I don't think the Pledge is a very good top coat for something that's going to be kind of bashed around and whatnot. But, I mean, the more it gets scratched, the cooler it looks. So we'll start it off with it looking almost factory, and we'll scuff it up as it gets brought around to events and whatnot. But this is a bolt-action blaster, and there aren't too many of these, let alone mag-fed ones, let alone ones that hit over 200 FPS. At least it did before I started painting it. So for this entire blaster, we have to go back to my original video on the L96 kit. I'm using the worker metal internal. So I've got a metal bolt, I've got a plastic bolt sled, but it's the bolt sled that comes with the Prophecy. I've got the expanded plastic plunger tube in here, but I am using the APE-X aluminum plunger rod, which gives me a 100% seal inside of a blaster that has a magazine, which is not something I've ever had. I've gotten close, but this one is 100%. And when I was testing it, it was hitting over 220 FPS. But how do we make something like that better? Well, we're using the APE kit, so that means I can use the 25 coil spring that comes with like the whole big shebang you get if you get the expanded plunger tube and the metal bolt and bolt sled face and everything like that. You can get this 25 coil spring, which is a pretty darn good spring. I've used it in a lot of different Retaliators, but I love it the most in this kit because it fits perfectly and it's just powerful enough to break 200, but you can still prime it back, which is really important because if you put something stronger, you probably can't prime it back with this metal bolt. One upgrade I did do was in the barrel. I replaced the original barrel I used for that L96 kit, which is, again, the one that comes with the kit for the Prophecy with the expanded plunger tube and whatnot, and replaced it with the Scar barrel from my worker Terminator, which dropped the performance somewhat. I was getting around 200 to 210, and that's a little bit less, but the accuracy is much improved. I think the accuracy is the biggest telling about this thing. Not only is it bolt action, but it is laser accurate. Accurate enough that I'm gonna need to try to figure out a way to bore sight this thing because it is seriously that accurate. Even kind of hip firing at it, I was able to hit my camera or get relatively close every single time, and I'm also able to pick things off at range like posts around the property and smack them with a foam dart, so that is very exciting. And the way this thing works is kind of how you would expect. You do have to brace it against something. In fact, I don't know if I'll be able to prime it from this angle, but you're going to pull this back until you hear a click, and then just like any other, like a pump action Retaliator or anything like that, it is ready to go. Drop the mag, load a dart up. In fact, we're gonna load a couple of darts up because the one thing I haven't done that I'm a little worried about is I haven't cronied it since I've done all the modifications, and I'm looking for 190 plus here. So hopefully, even though these are somewhat worn darts, because these are the ones I was just shooting outside, we can see a little bit of performance still in this thing. It's definitely denting boxes and stuff like that, so I have some big hopes for it. I'm hoping everything goes well. So we just close the bolt after we chamber around. Again, much like an actual bolt action rifle, and it is a long boy. And yeah, that's another thing, is like this thing is stupidly long. There's a lot of dead space, obviously, like the most amount of dead space you can get. So keep that in mind when you see these numbers. Hopefully we're still getting above 190. 199. So it's probably closer to 220, 230, and that's with Worker's Scar Barrel. If you didn't know, a Scar Barrel is a barrel material for NERF that has got like fishing line in it in a twist that grabs the foam on the dart and actually twists the dart at the end of the barrel, much like rifling in an actual rifle. So that actually does give you some insane accuracy. I know these Scar Barrels work. I was kind of dubious about them before, but when I went to Ragnarok Oktoberfest 2018, there was somebody there with a long shot with a Blaster Tech scar on it, and that dude, his blaster was so flippin' accurate compared to everybody else's, it wasn't funny. So they do work as long as you have a good one, and from what I've seen so far, this Worker one is pretty darn spiffy. We got 189 right there. And we'll get one more shot here. Hopefully this one breaks 200. 190. So again, keep that in mind with all of this dead space and everything like that. That's still very powerful, and that's about as good as you're probably going to get with a bolt action unless you go HPA, which means you'd have a giant, you know, tap with a hose coming off of this connected to an air tank if you want to do that, which this doesn't have that. It's just a Springer. I can take this and use this in any war that would allow me to use a sub 200 FPS blaster, which is great because this thing is so freaking fun. It's powerful enough to be completely usable at just about any war I'd ever go to, although it's powerful enough to obviously be outlawed at many of them. It's very, very accurate, and while it's obviously not super practical because of the heavy bolt action pull, it's good enough that it's fun enough to use if you don't want to actually try super duper hard. And you never know, some people do really good with like lever actions and stuff like that because they're good with them. They like that and they get really good with them. This is also something I feel that with enough practice you can get really good with it compared to, like, I don't know, I'm not really good with a Caliburn or anything like that. So hopefully this is my answer to the Caliburn. And thus it is pink, and I really like that. I used Tamiya paints for this entire thing, although I did run out of pink at one point. I had to kind of mix together a little bit of white and red to kind of get a shade that matched. You can't tell from there, but yeah, there are spots where it's a little bit lighter than others and whatnot. Can't really do anything about it. There's places where I still didn't have enough to kind of fill stuff in, so it looks a little worn, but I think that just matches the blaster. The one problem I really have is that this stock and everything like that won't stay all the way up, and I can't really bolt it anywhere except for on the side, which I probably will still do. But even down here, there's nothing connecting this, and I kind of wish Worker would have had like a plate on this piece that would match up to this one or something. I'm thinking I might make a little strap that goes right here and goes back or something, because there definitely needs to be something to make that a little bit more rigid, because otherwise this stock kind of flexes. But this is a really good chance for Worker to kind of think about making an injection molded version of this kit, because the Retaliator and the Prophecy are still very much things that people use. And even though there are, you know, Caliburns and stuff like that, they aren't bolt action yet. And honestly, I know a lot of you out there are gonna want a bolt action blaster that's powerful and accurate. So I will have a list of all the parts I used down in the description, whether you want to buy it from like NF Strike or whatever, or procure them yourself. I will just have them there. But other than that, I'm very happy with how this blaster turns out, and I hope you liked this one. Sorry it's been a little quiet. I was working on this literally every day for basically the last week, and I couldn't really do anything else while this blaster was on the bench, but it is now finally complete, and I'm ready to jump into some other things. So let me know what you think about L-Chan down in the comment section below. I will definitely do videos in the future comparing this to Caliburns and stuff like that, because it needs to be done, and I want to try to get Luchathor over so we can do some Scar Barrel testing and stuff like that with some of his Scar Barrels. But until then, I hope you enjoyed this. I'm Walcom S7, and I hope to see you in an entirely different video.
You gotta